Hi, welcome to Profound Experience of Poetry. This is a series of conversations that I'm having with people that I just want to talk to. And it's kind of like a bonus feature of the Profound Experience of Poetry Book Club, which is a thing we do every second Sunday on Zoom. If you want to join us, you can. We just read books and talk about them. My name is Lucy. I edit Profound Experience, and Shabby Dollhouse I did as well. And yeah, I'm excited today. I'm talking to Sam Riviere, and maybe you could introduce yourself, Sam.
Hello, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Sam. I recently published a novel called Dead Souls, and I edit a small press called If a Leaf Falls Press, which publishes small pamphlets of poetry. I've been doing that since 2015. And I've published 3 poetry books as well as the novel, and various other kind of miscellaneous type things. But those are the facts, I guess, the main facts. I live in Edinburgh. Hi.
Hi, thank you for talking with me.
It's a pleasure.
So your book Dead Souls came out like last week, the week before?
Yeah.
How do you feel?
I feel good. I finished it 2019, pre-pandemic, so it's been and it was always going to come out this year. So, but it feels like I finished it quite a long time ago now. But I still feel pretty good about the book, and it's nice to finally feel that it's like people are reading it. That's actually a really nice feeling. So, and the reception's been good. So it's all been as good as I could have hoped. So, pretty happy, really.
Yeah, and so you had there's a UK edition and there's a US edition?
Yeah, there's 2. There's the UK one was bought first, and then my agent sold it to a small an indie American publisher called Catapult, which fortunately are amazing, and made a really lovely book as well. I'm really happy with the designs of both. They just look really cool, I think. So yeah, it worked out pretty well.
Have you I mean, I know it's still really new, but have you noticed, and is there anything different in the responses from the different countries?
Oh, I would say America's a bit more enthusiastic, maybe. I think maybe because there's been more reviews in America, and maybe it's not a very English novel, and I don't really actually read very much English fiction because I tend to find it's a bit too. Not that I have a problem with realism, but there's a particular type of realism that people seem to go in for in England, which everything feels it's almost like a play. There's like a sort of setting, and there's 4 or 5 characters, and it doesn't really feel very lifelike to me. I think life is a bit more various and weird than that. Don't even know what books I'm talking about. I'm probably constructing a completely false idea of what English fiction is like. But I tend to read more sort of European fiction. So, and maybe, yeah, it's quite a weird book. So I don't know, or maybe the publishers over there have just done a really good job. I'm not sure, but yeah, I sense a little bit of more interest over there, perhaps. I'm not sure though. It's hard to tell.
Do you think that yeah, because I mean, like, you were reviewed in the New York Times and the Washington
Yeah,
Post, and I read a sort of scathing review from
yeah.
NPR.
I think that's a compliment too, though. I was quite happy with that review.
I thought it was really
Thanks
funny.
for bringing it up. No, but I honestly quite liked it. I've had bad reviews for my poetry books before, and in a way, it's a kind of is a compliment because someone's taking it seriously enough. And also, like, it's like fine if you don't like the book. Like it's not for. I get it. Not they're not for everyone, and like I think that should be completely acceptable. And
Well, also the book is like, it could be sort of insulting to a certain kind of person who takes themselves seriously in
I
the
guess so. Yeah.
I don't know, when you were maybe you could like describe the book a little bit so before we start talking
Oh,
about it.
okay. Yeah, so it's kind of it's set not quite in reality, so it's in a slightly futuristic, but in a really kind of half-assed way, futuristic. Don't know if I should say that, but I thought I wanted to make it not quite reality, so I changed some things so it would give me a bit of license to make stuff up. So I'd be like, okay, it doesn't have to agree with London as it really is. So I was like, the easiest way to do that is to make it a slightly alternate reality London. So there's drones everywhere. You like use your thumb to pay for stuff. But these all seem like very like automatic ideas of what the future would be like, right? They're not really intended to be deep or realistic. But it did open up a bit of space where I could be like, okay, there's some other things are different, and you just sort of go along with it because you know you're not really in reality. They're more just like cues. But it's essentially about a poet who the narrator meets about a quarter of the way into the novel. And this poet sort of corners him in a bar and tells him his story, that he's been essentially caught plagiarizing poetry. He was outed as a plagiarist, and he then went away and he sort of reinvented himself and came back, and then he was like busted again for doing the same thing again. And that's just what's happened, and he's going to be sort of punished for it. That's the basic story. But yeah, on the way, I guess it does make fun of poetry world stuff and publishing stuff and England in general, London. I suppose there's various things. That the narrator's an incredibly negative and angry person, so almost everything that happens he has a problem with and goes on a rant about. It's like a big rant, the book, basically, about poetry and England and London. Yeah,
I absolutely love the narrator, and I read in that review the person was like, oh, I just wanted to get away from this character, yes, or whatever. But I thought that the narrator was like, it's just so funny, like just feels like somebody saying all the things that we say like when we're not being recorded.
Yeah, the private gripes about everything and like the private grievances. I wanted it to, and I think if you make it a bit exaggerated, it actually gives you license to sort of tell the truth in a slightly covert way, because people can tell you're putting it on for comic effect. But there is totally a seam of truth in it, I suppose. Yeah, so I think it sort of opens that up in a way. But yeah, I agree. I modelled him after Thomas Bernhard, who's an Austrian novelist who's incredibly cantankerous and upset about everything. And I personally love narrators like that. I just find them incredibly entertaining. So yeah, I'm glad you found him funny.
Yes, so funny. And is this the first time you've written a novel?
Yeah, there's a book that came out in 2017 called Safe Mode, which I maybe like it was a bad idea. I called it an ambient novel. But if you look at that book, it's like these short bits of prose, which aren't really related to each other in any obvious way. There's not really a narrative. And then there's photographs in it as well. So it's more like a sort of experimental prose book. Yeah. But I didn't know what to call it. So I called it an ambient novel. And then obviously my publisher, for reasons about hype, wanted to call this my first novel. So that's how it went. And I guess in any meaningful sense, this is a novel. Like the other one, I don't think if anyone read it, they would seriously think it was. It's like prose fragments, or I don't know. It's hard to know what to call a book like that.
So, I mean, you've got 3 full-length collections of poetry, and you've also got like various chapbooks and stuff. But what was it like, sort of taking on this like much longer project?
It is really different, and I think I didn't know how I would do it for ages, and I didn't even know if that it wasn't even really an idea until there came a point where I thought I had enough like material to sort of gathered over quite a long time, over years probably, just like, I don't know, observations, like little ideas for scenes. And then I didn't really know, and eventually I started thinking that maybe it's a novel, maybe it could be a novel. And it wasn't until I read a few Thomas Bernhard novels and a few other, Muriel Spark actually, who has this quite funny satirical novel about the poetry world called Loitering with Intent. And Dag Solstad, who's a Norwegian writer who also writes these like very in-depth, like thought processing novels. Like they're always often in the third person, or always, but they'll often be like someone deciding where to sit at an event, and it'll be like this, it'll go on for pages, you know. And I realized I really enjoyed that kind of thing. So it's more like I sort of worked out how I might be able to do it. And then once I'd done that, it became easier to do. And I did really enjoy the process, because it's unlike writing a poetry book in the sense that when I was working on it, I would just go back to it every day. It was like almost having a job. Like I went to the library every day to work on it, and I would get there at like 10 or 11, and I would write till like 4 or 5, or I would read and write. I don't think I actually wrote probably for more than an hour a day. but I would sort of try to get into the state of mind where I felt I could. And so that process was totally different to writing poetry, which just seemed far more I had to just feel like it, or like go back to something when I was in the mood, and you couldn't really sit down and expect it to happen.
Right.
So it felt quite different in that way, but in a way quite satisfying as well, because you feel like you're, every time you go back to it, you're adding something and it's getting to this bigger thing. And then I would read through it all every week or two, I think, to sort of see where I was. But yeah, so quite different, like a much bigger, hard to keep it all in mind. But yeah, it is very different, I would say. Do you find that switching between them?
Yeah. Recently I've been writing quite a long prose thing, and it's like just like that thing where you have to go back and read the whole thing to like sort of replace yourself. It's like,
yeah, definitely. I think I would read the preceding like 1,000 words or few pages every day before because then it's like a run up before you start again, almost thing. So you like can dip back into it. But then I wouldn't, obviously you can't do that every day, especially as you go on, you can't read the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I would just like find I was reading the previous few thousand words, and then I would read the whole thing through far less. I don't even, not regularly, but at some point I would like, oh, I need to work out some time issue or something. So I had to read the whole thing to like make sure I hadn't contradicted myself somehow.
And did you know like what was did you have like a detailed outline, or were you making some stuff up as you went along?
It's like a combination, I suppose. Like I had ideas for things that I thought would happen, but I didn't know exactly what order they'd happen in. And I didn't know necessarily who they'd happen to sometimes, like whether it would happen to the narrator or a character. And I think once I'd had the idea, once I'd realized that most of the book would be a narration by a character who isn't the narrator, then a lot of the stuff got put onto that character instead, and he became like the focus of it. And there was stuff that I wanted to do that I didn't put in the end because there just wasn't, like, it didn't fit in the end, that kind of thing. So I had like a list of like possible stuff, but very disorganized. Like it wasn't at all, I didn't have a spreadsheet or something. I would just have various pages in notebooks that had like lists of things that might happen. But I definitely, I don't know from when, but I had some sense of how it would end from quite early on. Yeah. Like, so you could have something to aim at, right?
Yeah. But I don't like knowing exactly what's going to happen, because then it's just boring. Just like now.
It'd be like a direction, a sense of a direction. But I wouldn't know exactly what that would be. And definitely the bits that were the most fun was things that I came up with during the process of writing it, right? I would be like, something's going to happen here, or there will be something going on, and then the idea would occur to you while you were writing. Those were the more funny things, I suppose.
Yeah. I can imagine it would have been really funny for you while you were writing it, like just like coming up with like all the little details about, like one thing that I found really amusing was like when you would describe, there's a scene where the narrator goes into the Travelodge and like looks around at the different tables and sees all the different poets and like lists their names and what they've published and what awards they've won. And it's like just all made up, but like makes you feel like how meaningless it is.
Yeah, that was fun. I think I had that. There's a few scenes where there's just, or bits where there's just like quite long lists of things, like lists of types of poetry, or lists of poets, or lists of like magazines. And I thought I just like lists, I think. So I thought it would be funny to, and like, it's like that biography thing we were talking about before we started recording. I think about like how constructed people's biographies are, and that they're kind of fake, really, however true they really are. And that it would be funny just to reduce everyone to their sort of poetry world biography, that you don't know anything about them apart from there's no physical descriptions at all in the book, really. It's just like descriptions of what people have written, which seemed like a funny way of reducing everyone to just their writer profile. Yeah.
And I love like the names of the magazines that you made up.
Yeah.
Just all, it's like they sound like they would be real.
Yeah, that was fun actually. Sort of, just this like parallel reality sense of things.
Yeah. And how do you feel about like, do you feel like some people will be offended? Because
I kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I suppose there are some things which are a bit close to the bone for me even.
Yeah.
So which I sort of had to slightly grit my teeth to do. But it's like I thought like I have to do it for everyone, right? If I'm going to, like, you can't really let a certain type of poet off the hook. Or it makes a lot of fun of like London clique sort of poets. So that then there's a bit where the narrator not the narrator, the main character goes to the countryside and he meets these sort of washed up like rural poets, and like I can see that portrayal might offend some people. But it's kind of all kind of larger than life, or like not. It's obviously not real. Like it's obviously a heightened version of things. So, but I suppose in some senses it would fail if it didn't like rub some people up the wrong way a bit, because it's supposed to be a kind of criticism, really, of the way. I think it's transferable to other kinds of art form sort of communities, but yeah, there's a kind of problem with a lot of these communities often, right? Like
totally.
So yeah.
Also, like with the thing with the rural poets is like you equally offend the people who in the book it says like there are these people who live in London and they should just leave, but they can't leave. Yeah. They can't handle it and they'll be destroyed. Yeah. But then they can't leave because they can't go to the country.
They'll be destroyed there as well. Yeah, probably more quickly. Yeah.
And that, like, I mean, I've never, like, I'm English, but I've never been involved in the English poetry world, really. Yeah. Like, I've just sort of seen it from the edges. Yeah. But the things apply to, you can apply it to New York or Paris or whatever. Like, it's the same, and I think that's.
Yeah, I think it's striking when you read older novel. I read a few Arthur Schnitzler, who wrote Dream Story, which Eyes Wide Shut is based on. He also wrote this book called Late Fame, which I found really inspiring, actually, which is about like a poet who wrote quite a lot in his youth, and then when the story starts, he's sort of in his 60s, I think, and he gets sort of rediscovered, and he starts going to all the readings and that sort of thing somewhere in Germany. And it's the striking thing, and this must be set in the 1930s or something, but the striking thing is it's exactly the same. Like all of the characters are exactly the same as the people you would have met if you go to any of the things. All of the questions that people have are exactly the same. Like it's just, and in Roberto Bolaño, who I'd read The Savage Detectives, which I loved, but then I read a couple of his other novels afterwards because people had compared my novel. I mean, he's obviously amazing. I wouldn't compare myself to it. But like they'd said it's a similar type of book, and the same thing. Like a lot of the types of character are like, oh, I kind of know this person. Like a lot of the issues are exactly. I think just that's the nature of poetry scenes or art scenes, whatever. Like there's always questions about authenticity or someone faking it or like someone approaching it in a certain way, right? Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
And you wrote in the book about how like the idea of progress in poetry and like how it doesn't really make any sense that in the future poetry should be any better.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's always confused me. Well, it's obviously true that poetry doesn't improve, but it has to change. I just feel like it would be entertaining to. What I tried to do in that bit is to like point out why every approach is wrong. So like to try and write poetry as it used to be is wrong because that's nostalgic and that's a fake idea about what poetry should be. To write as if it's progressing is wrong because obviously Shakespeare's still really good. It doesn't get better over time. Poetry, we don't improve at it. And then also to sort of write as if you're just changing with the times is wrong as well, because then you're just like a capitalist, you're just like marketing yourself or whatever. And surely poetry should be a bit different to that. I guess they're all wrong, but obviously I don't really believe that, or I somewhat believe it, but it seemed as if you enter a certain way of thinking, you can convince yourself of any of these things, right? That there's no absolute truth in any of them, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. I felt like it was like, oh, this book is just like for someone who's exactly like me. Like when I was which is a great feeling for me. I mean, I hope that other people have that experience too, but just like I just loved how it's like so many ideas about poetry just being thrown around by these like amusing characters who are just like
no, I really like that in novels, like that they're about ideas sort of being tested out or something.
Yeah, and it's like if you just decided to write an essay or something, and you were like, here are some thoughts, like all from your point of view, like it would be interesting, but
Yeah.
it feels like the form is perfect. Like that you.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I really felt that. I think I did consider writing an essay about that. I had like notes that might have been an essay about some of these subjects, and I've been thinking about them a lot. Like something like, are you expressing yourself when you write? Like, is it revealing of your like inner self or something? Or is it like a mask? You know, is it personal or impersonal? I felt like I could never work this out in a sense. Once you think one way, the other way seems like that must be right. Like it's kind of both. And I could never like think my way through this in a way that felt good. And then it seemed as if a novel was a better way of approaching that because you could just try out the idea. Like, okay, what if you assume poetry was like really revealing of yourself? Like it was like because there was always the question for me was almost like, can you know someone through their writing, right? Which in some ways seems like, of course you can. It's their most innermost like things, but in another way, it's obviously they're presenting that publicly. So in a way, it's a mask, right? In a way, it's what they're putting forward. But then you could say, but isn't that the case in any situation that you're right? So I would go down these sort of rabbit holes with this thought, and it seems eventually more entertaining, at least more satisfying, actually, in some way, to get at something better, to like literally sort of experiment with that thought process in a fiction, right? In events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think about, like, obviously people who are not poets are going to read this too, or people who are not writers? Like, how is that?
Yeah.
Their experience will be like.
Yeah, I wonder. I suppose there are some slightly in-jokey things about poets generally, which I suppose if you're a poet will like strike home a bit more. And I suppose there's some veiled things which sort of alludes to. Like I didn't want to mention any real poets in it at all, and there's no mention of it. There's never anyone real is never named. No real poetry movement is ever named. There's just like a sense of what they are. But like I think if you were like if you're a poet and you're like aware of vague things about poetry, some of them will obviously kind of be stand-ins for real things, or in a way be stand-ins for real things. But I don't think that really matters because actually it's just about sort of forces that are in opposition or that are moving in a certain way. I suppose, yeah, I hope it is still. That was probably my main question before I sold the book was like whether that's going to work for a person who isn't really involved in that world. I suppose the justification that has come up for it that I kind of think might be true is that those kind of questions apply in a lot of scenarios now. Like a lot of people, okay, they might not be poets, but they produce content of some sort or another, whether that's creative or whatever. And I think a lot of these questions still apply for those sort of activities. Pretty much everyone does, you know, even having a social media account, you're making decisions about self-presentation and curation and you know, everyone's like micromanaging their image in some way. And I suppose maybe inversely, like talking about poetry is a disguise for really talking about something a bit more widespread. I obviously wasn't thinking about that at the time, but I think that's quite a nice interpretation.
Yeah, and there's also, I guess, the possibility that you will make poetry cool again by people people will read the novel and then like get interested in your work and then, you know, find different things through that. Like it could be the other direction.
Yeah, sure. Or finally kill it off. I don't know. Yeah. Whichever.
Yeah. There's a part in the book which like I've found really hilarious where the narrator is supposed to, or is going to read the translation of a Ukrainian poet at an event like later in the evening, and they spend a long time thinking about like what does it mean and what is the point, and the Ukrainian poet isn't there, and so everybody's like he's just like, well, what is the value of this?
Yes.
And I thought that was just that, I don't know, that part of it, I was like, oh my god, there's so many things in here that I would think about before I was doing something or whatever, but I've never like seen it written down, and it was just like really,
nice.
it's just a
thing
to recognize.
yeah, I think that crisis of like presentation, or even if you yeah, the narrator is reading the poems of another poet, which I did actually have to do once. I
Yeah, it
mean,
was. I've seen you do it, in fact.
oh yeah, Luna, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
was, that was one, and then there was another one a few years before, I think, where the poet couldn't turn up. Who was a Ukrainian poet, so it's partly model on truth. They weren't detained at Heathrow like in the novel, but they couldn't come
Mm.
for visa reasons. So it's kind of based on truth. But yeah, there was a feeling of like, how am I supposed to dramatize this person I've never met's like very personal writing somehow by like speaking it in another
Right.
language? It just, there seemed something like completely inappropriate about it for a moment or two when I was doing it. I was like, who am I to be? Obviously, I'm just supposed to be like a channel for this person, but at the same time, I couldn't really avoid the feeling that I was kind of like in some sort of dishonest way, like co-opting their works. I
Right.
don't know how. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of discomfort, I think, around poetry readings generally, and I think I don't know why people have to do them. I mean, I kind of really like them, but I think really they came back with Allen Ginsberg. Like, I think he was the person who like popularized them, at least in the UK. He came and did a huge reading in the '60s, where it, like, yeah, it did make poetry cool again. I think before that, you had to be like Dylan Thomas or someone to go and do readings. Like, it didn't really apply to like. I might be wrong about this. That's my general impression.
Mm.
That kind of made poetry readings much more of a thing.
And much
Uh,
more fun.
yeah, and like it's an event. Like you go and it's not only like. And then I think there's sometimes this discomfort about embodiment, that you have to like embody the work somehow. And for some poets, that works really favorably, like because their work, for whatever reason, is like gonna hit home in that kind of environment. And for other poets, obviously, it's like completely wrong, and their poetry isn't about their embodied self, and it's
Right.
weird for them to have to do that.
Yeah,
Um,
the
yeah, go on.
combination of the people of the poet and the reader has to be perfectly aligned. Otherwise,
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes a strange disconnect or something going on there. So yeah, I've thought about that quite a lot, I suppose, and like wondered about it. And like, I think there was a point where I just really didn't want to be present. For me, part of this doesn't apply to everyone. It's more of a personal take on it. But for me, like part of the attraction of poetry was that I didn't have to be there. Right?
right.
Like when
Right.
someone read it, I wasn't in the room. That was
Yeah,
much
yeah.
better for me. Because I don't really, I mean, I've done quite a number of poetry readings, obviously, you kind of have to, and I have enjoyed them sometimes, and I've enjoyed being at them a lot as well. But I suppose it felt as if it was a kind of flattening sometimes of that became like where the poem had to like live or die or something. And
Right.
actually, I felt my actual like, I don't know what to call it, but profound experiences with poetry or whatever you want to call it, like have been really me in my room reading it. Like it's very rarely been at an event where someone's performing it. Maybe that's just because I'm more of a reading person than I am a like performance person. But yeah, it felt like a strange deal to suddenly have to like. You really couldn't really get involved in poetry when I started to go to reading stuff unless you went to readings. That was how you met people. That was how you like got known. So it feels like this curious thing where like in a way the reason I liked it in the first place was kind of made irrelevant, right? Like you had to be there, you had to show up and like
Right.
embody your work in a way that I didn't really like, because I quite like the idea that I wasn't the person in my poems, or that's always a delusion or something, but or it's a
Mhm.
kind of game. But I quite like the idea that you could like go beyond your personal experiences in a poem. Like though they might be somewhat about your life, they also kind of, if someone else can identify with that, right? Then that means they're kind of beyond you. Like they're not just you, they're bigger than that. And like I think when you read a poem that's like got an I in it that you really engage with, it's like you're the I in a way. It's not like there's this person who's different, right? It's like
Yeah,
more like
yeah.
you become that. Like in Frank O'Hara or something particularly, I think it's like,
Mhm.
although he's a very like charismatic poet, you also feel like you become a
Sort of.
bit like the person in the poems when you read them, right? It's not like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's really complicated, I suppose, and it was like frustrating sometimes to try and think this stuff through. So yeah, that's why it got in.
Well, I was thinking about that reading. So in 2013, I think, there was this
Yeah,
event at like the Serpentine Gallery in London,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
and Luna Miguel, who's our friend,
Hmm.
um, wrote this poem called Museo de Canceras, or Museum of Cancers, which we published in Shabby Doll House.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
And then she came over to London, read it, and then you read it afterwards in translation.
Yes.
And like at the time, like I mean, I just accepted it as like a thing that was happening, and I still do, I guess. But like, just like I was thinking about it, and I'm like, that's so weird. Like, why? Like, how strange it is that like we can just like be people who know each other and can hang out and chat or whatever, and then there's this other thing where it's like you have to go
Yeah,
on a stage in a big museum, and like
it's kind of insane.
yeah, and like read it on this video like in front of like hundreds of people or whatever, and it's just like it's a poem that's like really personal and
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
like
that's the weird. Yeah, it's very strange also to read something like that out, where like there was lots of names in it as well that I really
yeah,
struggled. It was kind of a nightmare for me to read that because it was like I mean, I was very flattered to do it, and
yeah,
I really respect Luna's work a great deal. But it was like kind of a problem as well. It's like, how am I going to like get through this in a way? And also, yeah, because it's such an intensely personal poem, you feel like it's coming into you when you're reading it out, right? Like it ceases to be this like someone else's words. They like come, if you read it just on the page or on your website as well, you have this experience of it being part of your life suddenly. And it's like that's kind of quite an amazing thing, isn't it? And then the other like the flip side of that almost is like the fact that also it affects like these weird word constructions like affects your life. Like you end up going on a trip to Romania, and right, it's like they actually like
right,
where we met for the first time, right? So like it's actually as if they're not just these inconsequential things that live in a void that like it's art and it's over there. They actually like put a kind of momentum on your life as well, you know, and they propel you into weird scenarios. And there's this really weird element that I can't really work out about that as well, right?
yeah. We should say like we both went to a poetry festival in like 2015 in
That sounds right.
Sibiu,
Yeah.
yeah, Sibiu in Romania, and it was just like absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, really good.
We
That's
were
great.
there for like a week or something, and
Yeah.
I just the whole time we were just like we don't really know what's happening.
No.
We just kept getting like led to the next thing, and we would like
Yeah. And also seeing like a literary sort of scene, which was very young. There's a lot of very young people involved in it there as well. But sort of seeing it, it's like it is a bit like you've gone into a parallel universe where like you're seeing the same things, but they're done a bit differently. Um,
right.
I really enjoyed that a lot. It was quite
Uh,
eye-opening for me in a way to like see this sort of with the you know different like Central European history of that place, like seeing that they have a different value on poetry slightly, and that yeah, the whole thing was just quite intriguing in that way.
it was so fun, and also like so many of the people there, like Lika Masman and Katy
Yeah,
Pratt and Luna Miguel, and like it was
yes,
just like all these amazing writers, and then all these Romanian writers who we didn't know, or
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't know until then.
yeah. No,
But
it was great.
you're doing something now with Catalina Stanislav?
Yeah, so that's really nice actually. Catalina Stanislav, who organised the festival with Vlad Pajoga, who we when we went there, I think they still do it, right?
Yeah.
She's me and her are doing a thing for Modern Poetry and Translation, which is a magazine based in the UK, where we're writers in residence for the rest of this year, I think. So really, all that means is we're going to write some articles for them, and I think there'll be a reading, probably online, and there'll be some sort of publication that comes out of it. But yeah, I feel like I've been wanting. I wrote up some of that festival for like a piece of journalism. But I kind of definitely wanted, and I went back to Romania about 2 years after that with Crispin Best, and I kind of have wanted to go back and also wanted to like somehow make a connection between, if I can, between like the UK and what's going on there, because I think there's quite an exciting approach to poetry there that I just kind of connected with, although I don't speak the language or anything, but I
Hmm.
felt like more excited by their approach to poetry than I have about UK poetry for ages. Just like it seems more subversive and more like they kind of really don't care. And I don't know if
Right.
that's like a Romanian thing. Like apparently, like me and Crispin did a reading there where we literally got like roasted after our reading, because that's like more of their tradition. It's like if I mean, I don't want to misrepresent it because I'm not an expert. I've been there like twice for a week, but like I think that tradition in poetry is more like, if you don't like it, you say, because it's important. Like people get up and leave readings if they don't like it. Or I heard like there were like older poets who would come to readings and like slow clap if they didn't like the poem. And it's like that would just never happen in England. Like everyone's just so polite. Even if you loathe the poet, you're like, great reading, you know? And I really hate the like, although there's no way out of it, I really hate the like insincerity of that in a way.
Do you think there's no way out of it?
It probably is. I think the way things are set up is that if you do, you know, I am in two minds about it. There's a guy, Steve Fowler, who sort of got me into a strand of European poetry about 10 or more years ago, who organises a lot of events. And he has a thing where he's like, no, politeness is important, because if everyone told the truth to everyone, no one would be friends. And also, it's like the opposite is very easy to imagine. Like it's very easy to imagine a world where everyone's just consumed with egotistical desire for success and no one helps anyone. And it's like, well, I don't want to live in that world either, right? So I think that there's definitely an argument for being nice, and I fully believe that as well. But I guess I think there's something about, maybe I don't think it doesn't happen in America in quite the same way, maybe. But there's something about the particularly English way that this manifests, which is like a little disingenuous sometimes, or something, or like people do stick to their clan or their tribe or whatever, and they're in a public facing way perfectly nice, but underneath that there's quite a lot of like resentment and disagreement and stuff. I don't know, just this weird dynamic that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It's scary though.
I'm a bit scared to say anything about it.
Yeah, no, totally. I shouldn't even talk about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've written a whole book about it, so it's it's too late. But I've never really felt connected with the English poetry world. Like I know you, and like I know Crispin, but and like I mean I know some of the people, but I just don't really feel like I fit in, and it feels, at least from the outside, like I am from England, but I have lived in different countries ever since being an adult, really. And so maybe like that's part of the reason, but I don't know, like it feels like there's a lot of emphasis on like institutional recognition and like people getting awards and
it's not very punk, is it?
I just like don't really care about stuff like that. Like I just don't think it's going to happen for me, or maybe I feel like I'm not from the right kind of background that I would be able to get into it anyway. Like
I think it does have a kind of, I think that's I've heard this and I've experienced it as well, that there's a kind of forbiddingness around it, a sense that if you don't know your shit or whatever, that you're not you're perhaps not that welcome. I think that's not really true in a lot of ways. It's true in some situations and not in others. And the way I kind of first got into stuff in London was by going to like readings in pubs where you basically got wasted and chatted to people, and it became fun. But that was really a circumstantial thing that I was living there at that time. Otherwise, I would never have met the people that I met in that context, right? And that was just a particular like arm of it, right? There's lots of other contexts that are completely different, like more university based or whatever. But I think like I remember being sort of somewhat on the fringes of that, and then like maybe around 2010 becoming aware of more like online poetry, and that being like a huge thing, because it was suddenly like you didn't have to be anywhere, and also that the value, or whatever you want to call it, like the things that determined whether something was good or not, were like the opposite, or completely detached from like whether you had like institutional acclaim or been published in some official magazine or not. That didn't fucking matter at all. Like it was whether you were like entertaining and like good enough in the context of the internet, right? Completely different question. I felt like that like opened stuff up in a kind of really exciting way at that time.
Yeah, that's true. But it's interesting because with you, like you like definitely like you have 3 books from Faber, and like, you know, you work for a university, and like you are like involved in these like larger institutions, but you're also always kind of like one foot out of the door, like it's not really.
Yeah, I think maybe with any, I think I've more comfortable being on the, I don't know how to say it, but like I think I don't really like being in the thick of a big social scene around an art form, really. Like I've never felt that comfortable in, like, with like online poetry, like I very much felt like I just spectated on that, really, but I felt like I like a lot of stuff went on in my head as a result. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I've been fortunate that, and it's, I mean, I'm gonna say lucky, but like I increasingly think when people say luck, they mean privilege. You know, it's like it's luck. Just you have to be able to be lucky, right? Like be in the right place or whatever. And I guess
Right.
like where I'm from, like Norwich, east of England, like it isn't that far from London. Like on my art school, I met when I went to art school, I met a poet taught me there who had like was able to introduce me to some stuff. So I had sort of ways into like a poetry world of some description, like from when I first got into it. So in a way, like things panned out in a way that was like good for me in that way. But it took a long time, I guess.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would even recommend the institutional path necessarily, but like for me, it turned out to be the right thing. But yeah, I guess I don't feel particularly like invested in UK poetry, whatever that is. I've kind of always found, a bit like with fiction, I've always found like American or European poetry kind of more interesting. There are some exceptions, but I tend to have been drawn to writing not from the UK especially. That's probably part of it too.
Me too, totally. Like I can't even think about I can't think of books that
Yeah,
I
there's
read that from
people
England.
my age who I like, right?
Yeah.
But going back, it's quite. I mean, there's people I've definitely had phases with, but I can't really think of very many who I'd be like, yeah, I really like love their work and come back to it. There's definitely American poets like that though. So
yeah, definitely. Me too. Strange, isn't it?
yeah, I wonder why. Maybe it's a sensibility thing. I'm not sure. Maybe it's that we're all part American because we grew up watching Friends.
Right. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to talk a little bit about your press, if a leaf falls press, because this is kind of connected I think, because you basically just like do whatever you want with that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I started it in 2015 and they're print-only publications. I don't have one right here. But I recently started getting this guy, Ollie Tong, who lives in Romania actually, to design them. So they look slightly different. They used to just look almost like PDFs, like with a little icon on and really minimal design. And now there's a bit of color, but they're still really plain. And they're on sort of ivory colored paper. So they look quite particular. And when I started, I did like literally 20 copies, I think, of the first one. And now we do 100 normally. So it's got bigger. And I've published, I think, like 80 or something titles now, like quite a lot over 5 years. And really, I could only do that because the print runs were so small for so long. And I printed through the university here where I worked for a while. So I had a discount. But yeah, that's been a thing that I thought I might just do it for a year, but it's ended up becoming more interesting than that somehow. I really like doing it. I can't really explain I can't explain why it's. I think there's a relationship that you have when you edit someone or you work closely with them on a manuscript. And sometimes I won't change anything, won't suggest changes at all, but I'll read it really carefully, like multiple times, and think about it quite a lot. I feel that's kind of a really sincere kind of relationship to have with someone. Like you might never meet that person, like you might never interact with them in any other way, but you kind of have this particular connection with them that's meaningful. And I can remember, like I always remember something, I can't remember every single of the 80 pamphlets in detail, but I can remember something about all of them and something about how the person was and like what we talked about and so on. And it's just a really I feel like that's how sort of genuine, not connections as in making connections for your career, but like genuine, like the tapestry of life kind of connections. Like that's how that happens, I think, or it can happen in a way that seems like genuinely I can't see a downside to it, right? Like no one's in it for any other reason than they really want to do it, and it's like there's a result at the end which both people can enjoy. Someone, you know, they get a quarter of the copies, so they have enough to do with what they like, and I pay for my own printing costs, so it all works out pretty fairly as far as I can tell. And I've just sort of got more interested in it the more I've done it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like that relationship when you're editing someone's work, like it's just like the best thing. That's like how I feel like then you know the person.
Totally. Because you find that with the magazine, I mean, you've had that role in a lot of different ways, I guess, but yeah, there's like some mixture of intimacy and formality, which I really appreciate. Because it's not like uncomfortably intimate, like someone's oversharing suddenly on a DM, or
right?
Like, oh, I'm not sure what's going on here, because there's a pretext for it, and the conversation is going to be necessary. And it's not so formal that it's just like work, because you're talking about something that means quite a lot. Certainly, the person who's written the work, and potentially for you as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to like they have to trust you going into it, because they're the ones like sharing maybe their feelings, depends what it is, but like, and then you have to sort of handle it and deal with it in a way where you don't address like, oh, I'm sorry this happened to you, or like, you know, that must have been difficult, or whatever. Like you don't comment on that, but you like have to like work with the fabric of it, and it like just feels like
it's kind of attentive, isn't it, and kind, or something. Although maybe that isn't quite the right word, but I think there is some kind of emotional presence to that relationship, but I wouldn't want to, I don't know how to categorize it exactly. Care, maybe.
It's just, I just feel like afterwards it's like, then you can just be friends or whatever, but it's like you're going into it with like a deeper level of understanding. I wonder, I suppose, like, I don't know what it's like I mean, obviously I've had people edit my work, but I've done a lot more of editing other people's. So I wonder how it feels for them. I hope also fulfilling.
I think you think about, from my experience, I think you think about it less when you're the writer. You just sort of assume that it works. But like, for example, I always remember the suggestion someone made. And if it's something that hits home, if it's something where you're like, oh, that makes it a lot better, you never forget that, I don't think. And you really value that person's input then, because you're like, okay, they kind of understand what I'm doing. And that does feel like a very, deep, I don't know if deep's the right word really, but it does feel like a very real connection with someone, to be like, they understand my work, right? Which is, I know it sounds a bit pretentious maybe, but that's kind of, if you do writing, that is obviously important to you, you know?
If you just feel like known, I think.
Interesting.
And but with the press, it's like the books are a certain, how do you describe the process driven, or it's like
I phrase it in some way on the website, like something like an emphasis on appropriation and process driven writing. Because I kind of don't want to publish. I started out with it just wanting to publish like just found work, really, or just work that was like emphatically like impersonal, like just like lists and things like that. Mainly because I just thought it would be funny, and I never saw work like that really getting any attention or being published anywhere. But yeah, I knew poets that I knew had made things like that kind of for fun. And it's like, what are you going to do with it? You're probably not going to put it in your book, or so. Right. Initially, it started out as, I think people would actually put it in their books, but maybe I just wanted to sort of see if there would be a response to that, and there was, like, more than I thought there would be. And I will sort of publish anything, but I just want to tilt it away from being like personal lyrical sort of poetry. And even if it is very personal, I don't care. But if it's approached in a way that's sort of somehow interesting, or somehow like not about the craft of writing necessarily. Like one of my favorite things I published was a list of Amy Key, who's a poet. Uber pickups. It's just like a list of all of the texts she got, the people coming to pick her up in Ubers. And like there was something like completely impersonal about this, but at the same time, because you have like a timestamp, and I actually don't even have the timestamp on them, But at the same time, there was some emotional or personal content to that, because that's literally very private messages in a certain
right.
sense. And like there was something about that content that once it was in a book form, it suddenly felt kind of unexpectedly strange to me how it read. I was like, there's something actually really kind of beautiful about this, or certainly compelling. And then so I started to look more concertedly for that sort of thing. But I've also published some fairly like, I don't know, traditional, in inverted commas, sort of poems through the press. But yeah, there tends to be something like they're a little set of poems all around the same thing. I wrote Anna Caret's, or Carette, I don't know how you say it. But she has poems that are all kind of about horror, called Non-Final Non-Girl. But
I've got that
poems,
one.
yeah, they're poems that are like written in the normal way, but they're kind of around the subject of like the final girl idea. So
Right.
there's a sort of thematic connection there. And then she writes in this like really like hilarious, immediate way that for me just works really well. So
Yeah, she's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's great. You've got all of these books they're just like little insights into writers that might have done much longer things, or like different kinds of things, but then you get like this little like package from
Yeah. That's exactly what I wanted. It like miscellaneous or like side project sort of thing. Like, but nonetheless, I think sometimes those are the best things. Like I really like finding someone's like weird project they did that doesn't really fit in with anything else they do. But sometimes like, or like the weird album that a musician makes that is kind of the best one somehow.
Yeah.
Like that kind of feel.
And so do you think that like you're gonna keep going with this like indefinitely, or do you have like different plans for it, or are you just gonna keep?
I think just keep going for now. I would like to do books eventually. But that's such a different undertaking, because I think if you're going to do books, you can't do a limited edition of 50. It just doesn't really make any sense, because the expense of making a book. And I feel if someone's making a book, they want enough people to be able to see it.
Yeah.
But I don't know quite how that would work yet. And there was a thing with the press where I felt like there was a reason for it to exist. It was like, okay, there isn't anyone really doing exactly what I wanted to do. So it's like, I feel that's a good enough reason for it to be there. But with books, I haven't quite worked out how that would work yet. But I would like to do that in the future. Maybe I'll start thinking about it more this year. But I think I'll just keep going with the press for now. It seems to be working quite well, and I've got quite a lot of things lined up. So yeah, it's good.
Nice. Oh, cool. What do you think about, like, because we've been living in a pandemic for a long time, does that like change anything about your approach to writing or publishing or anything like that, or even just to life?
Yeah, it has undoubtedly changed things. I don't know if I'll be able to have anything very illuminating about that. The publishing thing, it meant it slowed down quite a lot. And for a while, I had to hand make the pamphlets. We did Stacey, who I know you interviewed on this as well. I did a pamphlet for her, which me and Ollie designed so we could print it at home. And so, because the printers were shut down, obviously.
It's like really tall.
Yeah, it's like an A4 folded, like a sort of menu style. Wine list style. So there were ways around, and I did another two like that as well, that were like, because the printers were shut, I made them here. So it affected things in an immediate way in that way. Writing wise, I was just editing, so editing the novel, so it didn't really affect me, other than I was able to sort of burrow into it. Maybe it's put a bit more intensity on. I guess online just seems it's become just like more at the forefront of everything.
Yeah.
I suppose there's that dimensional. I haven't really registered exactly how that's changed, but that seems noticeable, I think.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's going to be like a big rejection of it, like for a while, if we'll all just be like, I can't look at it anymore.
Yeah, I would, understand that. And I think it does feel like it's become so intertwined with even my work now. I basically have to be on my phone as well as a computer, because you have to do various like logins where you need your phone. And I just feel like I've got like like I'm just this sort of networked object or something. Obviously I don't like that feeling. No. I would love to like go away and not be online for a few months, but it seems like you physically can't do that, right? Like,
where would you go?
We've been trapped as well. you can't actually live.
Right.
So it's worked, whatever it is, it's worked.
I know. And one other thing is like you had another book come out at the beginning of the pandemic. Your poetry
Oh
book,
yeah,
After
yeah,
Fame, came out like right at the beginning, right?
great timing. Yeah. Actually, maybe it wasn't bad timing in a way, but it seemed like the last thing anyone should have to think about at that moment. Yeah, that's a book I'm still fond of. Although it is a weird book. It's sort of poems based on a Roman poet, so from AD 100-ish, but sort of partially translated through Google Translate, which doesn't really understand Latin. So they came out very garbled, and I sort of worked on them and made them into something. But yeah, it's certainly, I haven't thought about it for a little while. It's certainly a strange book, but yeah, it's out there.
Yeah, I really like it. I think like because it's part of a trilogy.
Yeah, yeah.
Loosely, right? I would say that that's my favorite of the trilogy.
Oh, really? Oh, that's kind. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I think it's the most. It felt like the most fully what I wanted it to be like the more than the other two, which seemed the second one especially seemed like an experiment that just that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And the first one was like just this sort of rush of writing something really fast and yeah, which like has like all sorts of like wonkiness to it, which I also kind of like, but this feels more like considered and like written. Like I felt like it was like actually made as one thing, and it kind of went how I wanted it to. There was less unpredictability, maybe, but I'm glad you like it. Thanks.
But it's interesting also, like what you were saying about how you read that German book from the 1930s, and it was people talking about poetry and poets and stuff, and that is still that's like comes from even that like thousands of years ago.
Yeah, no, totally. It's the same concerns. People are worried about people ripping them off. People are like they don't like some other poet. It's exactly the same. That's the strange thing about it. Like, even this is pre-Christianity, right? People blame Christianity for a lot of stuff. But it's like it doesn't explain all of the things, you know. Yeah.
So do you want to read something? I don't
know.
Yeah,
I'd love to. I'll read a poem.
Is it new or it's from?
I can give you a choice. I could read.
Okay.
I wrote a poem loosely, sort of in memoriam of David Berman, who I know is a poet you really like. Maybe I'll read that one because I've never read it before.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, we read Actual Air in the book club.
It's so funny. I think that book is one of the. It's like I discovered it kind of before I got into poetry almost, and I thought it was amazing. And then when I started getting into poetry, I was like, oh, how does this even fit in? I don't know. And then like another year or two later, I was like, no, it's still amazing. It doesn't matter. Like it came from, because I found him through his band, Silver Jews. And that's why I bought his poetry book. And then I would have found the poets he was sort of into much like James Tate and people like much later. So I didn't really understand the context of his poems at all. But I did love them. And yeah, they're still amazing.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so this is a poem. It's called David as an Ape, and I was kind of having some weird thought that, like, obviously he was a person who had a lot of, not someone I knew, by the way, sort of knew people who knew him, and obviously someone who had a lot of like emotional pain. And I had this weird daydream when I'd heard about his death that like he'd like turned into an ape. And that, like, if he was an ape, he wouldn't have any of these problems. I mean, maybe it sounds a little bit glib or something, but anyway, that's what this is about. David as an ape. So he could be less pained, perusing his library of fleas as his antique eyes brush everyone in the audience once, even you, placid, bland, then on to some untelegraphed point without, the jungle glow, a tremolo arm bent lagoonwards. His fingers thick as bottlenecks, crow-footed like sofa leather, pinch fur, no bow and scruff, but never ash or maple, fretted and strung, never a rope. The brow is hunkered like a natural uncle's, mastering the chorus of nocturnal effects, above a face that doesn't slacken, but a simple instrument of will down-tuned to environment. With no studio fade, the night here is input without cessation, susurrus, circuitous. Reverb returns as eye flare, trees swell, rain fog, a column of starlight that ups and walks to the acoustic pool, weirdly clear of distortions. There it is.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah. I feel like now we're ending on a little bit of a down note, so I should say something uplifting. No, that was great. Thank you. I feel like I really like, it's really strange, but also really amazing when I'm having a personal poetry reading.
Sure.
Yeah.
No pressure.
No, thank you so much. And good luck with the book. I hope that like soon we can
I really
see.
hope so. Yeah, are you going to be in New York for a while? Over there, anyway.
Maybe a few weeks, but
okay.
Hopefully I can come back to the UK soon. And
yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know. It would be nice to like go out and
it would be
drink
lovely.
a lot and talk.
It would be great. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for this profound experience of poetry.
Thank you.